What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Welcome back to AmericaTrendsPodcast.com. I'm still Larry Rifkin, and he's still John Krofzik, I believe.
You still look the same.
Yeah, but sure. I want to see your identification. I want to make certain that you are on the voting rolls.
Ooh, I am. Not to
worry
about that.
I am. Or am I said. Or I am Sam.
Yes. Yeah.
All these different references. I am. John, let's play a word association game. If I say to you, China. What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, she was a wrestler in the WWE.
Okay, folks, I guess we're going to have a really intellectual conversation today with John. Okay, China from the WWE. Well, listen, if I said to you that in the old days, I thought you might have said something like, well, I think of lo mein, or General Tsao,
that's true. You're
or
right.
Ho Chi Minh.
The Chinese
Ho Chi Minh.
food
right?
is very good, most of it. Yeah.
Okay, so I thought you would at least go there. But no, you took a wrong turn altogether. But today, when we think about China, honestly, John, we do think about inexpensive goods. We think about Dollar Tree stores.
That's
we think
true.
about jobs that have exited the United States. And we also think about some belligerent activities in the South China Sea.
Right.
China is a really complex
It
society.
is. It's very
really
complex.
Is.
Yes, I think we got to be careful of China because they seem to be building their war machine. So I don't know. I don't know what to think about China, to be honest with you.
Well, not only are they building up their military, and we know that, and maybe we've taken our eye off the ball because we're so fixated and consumed with things called Russia, but China has plans, according to The Week, which is a wonderful publication that I love to delve into every week, and they have a headline, China's Plan to Run the World. Now, John, that sounds a little foreboding. That sounds a little over the top, but it's not, because they are investing trillions of dollars to build railways, ports, telecommunications, and sometimes I have a hard time figuring out, is this a communist country with a capitalist bent, or is this a capitalist country that uses the term communism really simply to identify the fact that it's a dictatorship? I can't quite figure this out anymore.
That makes two of us.
We're going to have to ask our expert who's coming on in a moment what he thinks, communist, capitalist, or some derivative, some hybrid.
Yeah, I think the hybrid is the way to go. They figured out that being a capitalist country has its advantages, but only I think the government is still controlling what goes on there.
Well, it's really interesting. I remember that on the radio program that we were involved with for many years, we had a guest, and I'll never forget this book. And in it, on page 2, 3, 4, it was very early on because, well, sometimes, John, I didn't read the whole book. I mean, I'm going to admit
I don't believe that.
I know. But I know how to read around a book. But in the early stages of this book, he had a great story about Rupert Murdoch. Now, you know who he is,
yes,
of
I
course.
do.
All right.
Yeah.
The big, domo at Fox.
Yeah.
And, of course, Sky Television. And just a billionaire, dynamo. And he was in China doing business. And he was at a dinner party, John. And this is a great story. And he's talking to all these guys who call themselves businessmen and bankers from China and so forth. And he's kind of laughing. And he said, it's interesting. Before I came to China, everybody told me to be aware that virtually everyone who has any power really is a government official and a party official. And he said, here I am sitting with all of you, and I haven't met a communist yet. And they all looked at him because they were all party officials and government officials. How naive could Rupert Murdoch be?
I know. And he brings us news.
Right. And they're looking at him. Of course I'm with the Communist Party. What do I need to wear? A lapel pin that says I'm a commie? I don't know. But I've got to tell you that this whole notion that China plans to run the world, I got just a little bit of a taste of this, John. We were down in the Bahamas several years ago, and I don't know, we were talking to some of the people on the island, and we were looking at some of the investment that was going on in the Bahamas. And they were building fields, and they were building all kinds of activities that were just quite striking, that there was a lot of development, cranes in the air. And I just asked someone, well, who's putting all the money into this? Because I didn't think the Bahamas were terribly well off. And they said, this is all Chinese investment.
Wow.
Now, you think about it, the Bahamas are right off our shore.
Yeah.
So what is China's game? What is their plan, John? Why are they building railways and ports, telecommunications in other countries? Is it just to be good neighbors,
No, I don't
John?
think so.
No, like a good neighbor?
And we were worried so much about the Russians, but I believe the Chinese are hacking and trying to get into our elections and stuff too. So,
well, they're also, don't forget, they are investing in many things here in the United States. I mean, one of the things that when we talk about trade that we forget about is how many jobs are created by the fact that there's a lot of outside investment here in the United States. People building car factories from Germany and other European nations. And China, of course, has bought up a lot of real estate here in the United States.
A lot of farmland. They've bought up a lot of places that have water and stuff, drinkable water. I mean, they are in everything. And I think we, as the United States, should be more careful instead of protecting our natural resources and other resources than selling them to outside sources like that.
Okay, well, we are going to be talking about all of this. We're going to find out what is the plan that China has. How did this plan evolve? What are they trying really to accomplish with this? Why are they doing this now? How does it affect us in the United States? And what have they built so far? And do these other countries benefit, or does China benefit? So you're going to hear all of that in just a moment from Dr. Derek Scissors. He's going to cut right through this, John.
I hope so.
Dr. Scissors.
I want to hear what he cuts out there.
Well, we're not going to be cutting out paper dolls today, John. We're doing some serious work. He is with the American Enterprise Institute. We have turned to them from time to time for great scholarly work, and he'll be joining us in just a moment right here on America Trends.
All right, let's have him on.
Podcast.com. We have Dr. Derek Scissors from the American Enterprise Institute on with us. And Dr. Scissors, have we taken our eye off the China ball? We seem to be so fixated on activities related to Russia. And it seems to me that China's very busy around the world.
No, they're definitely busy around the world. We have something here called the China Global Investment Tracker, which actually tracks investment and construction. And through the end of the first half of this year, so June 30th, 2017, we have China's investment and construction around the world to be worth $1.6 trillion.
Put that into some context for us. United States investment around the world. I know a lot of people are saying we don't want to invest in the rest of the world. We want to look here within the United States. They seem to have another approach altogether these days.
Right. Well, American investment around the world is still much bigger than Chinese. First of all, we started way before they did. Chinese investment really only became a major factor about 10 years ago. As for why we would stay home and China would go overseas, everyone thinks that China is growing much faster than the U.S., and in some ways it is. But a lot of Chinese firms are leaving China because they can't find opportunities there, and they find better opportunities elsewhere. The number one recipient of Chinese overseas investment is, in fact, the U.S. So even though there are some severe problems with our economy, serious problems with our economy, we have not only Americans benefiting from it, but we have Chinese firms that would rather come here than stay in China.
Is it fair to say that China is looking at the 21st century as the Chinese century? And how are they actually making that a reality?
Well, I don't think the Chinese are as confident about that as some people are in the United States. I think they certainly want the 21st century to be a Chinese century. China is a proud nationalist country, and the Communist Party feels most secure in power when China is doing very well in the world. So that's the goal, and I don't think they're very confident necessarily that they'll achieve it. One of the main things they've been doing, as we're talking about, is really increasing their global footprint. The U.S. has not seen another country been a global economic equal since the British Empire fell. And China's not there yet, but that is their goal. Their goal is to be as important globally as the United States is, and if possible, more important.
The whole notion of this One Belt, One Road initiative. Explain that to us.
So there are a lot of things behind it, but the basic idea is that China wants to build better transportation infrastructure from China to much of the world, to not just to Asia, but also to sub-Saharan Africa, even overseas to places like Australia, which you don't think of them as being they're not building roadways or railways, but they want to improve port infrastructure and maybe airport infrastructure. So they want to have more trade with the world, which of course increases China's global footprint. They also want to have more trade with the world because China imports a lot of oil, more than we do. It imports a lot of iron ore, which we don't import at all. It imports a lot of food, where we're an exporter. So China needs those connections to the world. And the main idea of One Belt, One Road is to make those connections bigger and better so that goods can flow more freely both to China and from China.
Is this to recreate something like the Silk Road?
That's right. I mean, a lot of Chinese behavior harkens back to times when China was recognized as a great civilization. It's obviously a very old and distinguished civilization, but they've had periods more recently of being eclipsed by Europe and the U.S. And so there's an element of this that says, well, there's a practical side of this. Of course, we want more trade, but let's all remember that China used to be a great trading power and a great naval power, and we're bringing back those days. That's not going to be noticed very much overseas, but it is going to be noticed in China.
Do you agree with the statement that it's the most ambitious global engineering endeavor? They're building these ports and railways and telecommunications than we have seen since the Roman Empire?
It could be. I'll give you a typical economist on the one hand, on the other hand answer, but hopefully it'll shed some light on this. We've been following, as I mentioned, Chinese construction for more than a decade. China was building a lot before One Belt, One Road was announced. You actually haven't seen that much of an increase with One Belt, One Road. It's almost more like a public relations endeavor. But if you look at how much China is building overseas, we have it as about $700 billion worth of construction activity in the past 12 years. That's going to go to $1 trillion in a few years, and then maybe if they can keep it up, it'll go to 1.5 and so on. So I don't know that I think One Belt, One Road is that important, but China's building overseas, building power plants, building rail lines, building housing for people. It is really important, and over the long term, I think it's the biggest that we've seen.
How does this all tie together with their military adventurism to the extent that we see that in the South China Sea?
Well, if you take the idea, which is a reasonable idea on China's part, and you say China depends on energy and food and metals coming to China, and it makes a lot of money selling cell phones and computers and TVs overseas, including in the United States. China needs trade much more than the U.S. does. And that One Belt, One Road fits into that. It's building trade facilities all around the world. But go along with that, the Chinese don't want their trade restricted in any way, and they don't particularly care about restricting other people's trade. So there's kind of a zero-sum, a win or lose situation in the South China Sea, which is the Chinese want to make sure that area is safe for Chinese trade, and other people's trade, well, that's negotiable. And the U.S. view is everybody's trade has to be safe, and therefore we're in a clash with China over the same goals that they have with One Belt, One Road. It's not that they're directly connected, but the goals behind control of the South China Sea and One Belt, One Road are similar.
I recall there was a documentary on Vice a couple of years ago, and we saw them building these tremendous urban centers that nobody was occupying. And a lot of that was to grow the number that they could give out to the world as to their GDP. How does this adventurism and this activity economically around the world, how does that relate to what they're doing internally?
Okay, so, first of all, the Chinese, when it's convenient for them, will exaggerate their activities around the world, too. They'll tell you, oh, we're so important to your economy because of this and that, so you better be nice to us. And they'll exaggerate that to their own benefit, and people need to be skeptical of Chinese claims. What's going on to link what's going in China to their activity around the world is China has, as you mentioned, and has too much capacity. It's built up too much stuff, and it's not just housing. They have too many airports. They have too many steel plants. And I know a lot of Americans are thinking, well, those are jobs, but they have places where nobody lives. They have plants that don't run. They built them and then they never use them. So one of the things that China has used to justify quietly its One Belt, One Road program is, oh, well, we have too many of these things here. Let's move them elsewhere. Let's move our airports someplace else. Let's move our steel plants someplace else. Our companies will still get the work. And now, instead of having too many of whatever it happens to be in our country, we'll have more in another country. So this is part of China's response to making economic mistakes at home. I'm not saying it's only motivated by that, but they are definitely thinking we should not be building more of this stuff here. We don't want to close down the companies involved. Where can they go build it elsewhere?
One Belt, One Road. I'm reading that there are 68 governments and international organizations that have agreed to participate. What does that say to us as we just pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Are we becoming more isolated and they more integrated into the world economy?
That's possibly true. I don't think it's happened yet. Remember, the Trans-Pacific Partnership never went into effect. So depending on what you think about the TPP, you can either say we avoided a mistake or we should. It was a way for us to go forward that we didn't take. It was a missed opportunity. But it doesn't change how integrated the U.S. is in the world economy yet. On the Chinese side, how integrated they are with One Belt, One Road depends on whether you think it's a good idea or not. If they're wasting a lot of money building facilities in other countries that no one uses, that integration only lasts about a year. And you know as well as I do, if you build a new highway, there's a great christening, oh, we have a new highway, and then no one uses it. Nobody gives China any credit. No one says China is really important to our economy in a foreign country because the highway was a waste of time. So if One Belt, One Road is well executed, it definitely will enhance China's integration with the world, and that'll be something the U.S. has to consider responding to. Do we want to, create our own investment initiative? Do we want to sign free trade agreements, not TPP, but others? I think there's also a possibility, though, that China's going to blow a lot of money, and it's not going to get a lot of long-term gain.
Well, is this a smokescreen for strategic control of some sort?
This is another great answer. It's a smokescreen where it is, and it isn't where it isn't. In other words, One Belt, One Road is really big. You've named 68 countries. The Chinese are not trying to have, military bases in 68 countries by any means. So let's say in 60 of those countries, it's not a smokescreen. But isn't it great that we can add 8 countries where China does have strategic goals, and now they can hide them behind this program? So I don't think the point of the whole program is to expand in a military sense. I don't think that's true. But the program is great cover if you're China to cover that expansion. Where you do want to expand, which is much less than 68 countries, you can just say, oh, wait, it's just part of One Belt, One Road. Well, you can't. Don't point at us. This isn't a security program. It's a commercial program. Look at all these countries we're expanding in. So it's great cover that way. And if you were a cynic, not that I'm encouraging that, you might say that the Chinese would say, well, I don't really care if Scissors or whoever is right that we're losing money on One Belt, One Road because we have other goals, and those strategic goals would be a big part of it.
I was in the Bahamas several years ago, and I started talking to some of the people there because I saw a lot of activity going on, a lot of building, and they said it was all Chinese money.
Yeah, there was a very big Chinese luxury resort project in the Bahamas. This is a great example. I mean, in the order of $3.5 billion, which in the Bahamas is a lot of money. This is a little place, right? It's going to employ lots of people, and it's going to bring in a lot of tourist money. This is a very big deal. I'm no expert on the Bahamas, but I would guess it was the biggest economic event there for a long time. And guess what? The project didn't work. The local contractors the Chinese signed up with, they got into a dispute with the Chinese company. Some other foreign company had to come in and take over. So, we eventually got a project there, and maybe it'll be very successful, but it's not controlled by the Chinese anymore. They built it, but they don't control it. So you get both sides of it. You get China engaging in a project that's really important to the locals, but then it doesn't quite work, right? And it doesn't quite work out the way the Chinese intended.
I remember that Deng Xiaoping said, hide your brightness and bide your time. But when President Xi announced this moment had arrived recently, back in 2013, he said, it's time to achieve the Chinese dream of great rejuvenation. So was that a big departure from where they had been?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think Deng Xiaoping, really was looking for not to cause trouble in the world, not to gain people's attention, but to focus on development within China and improving the lives for ordinary Chinese, as long as they went along with Communist Party rules. Don't get me wrong. So I don't want to say Deng Xiaoping was a great guy, but he was focused on improving the lives for ordinary Chinese. Xi Jinping seems to be focused on making himself important. The China greatness, which in parentheses means Xi Jinping's greatness. And you can't be great and you can't be recognized as great and you can't be treated as the new leader of globalization, which is somewhat ridiculous, unless you're out there bragging. So it's a big change. Deng Xiaoping really wanted China to be better off and stronger, and Xi Jinping wants China to be recognized already as successful, already as strong, and of course with him at the helm.
How formidable is he?
Look, I mean, China is a big country. It has the world's largest population for a little while longer before the Indians pass them. They have a lot of land area. They're modernizing their military, and their military is quite large. So if you just take a snapshot of China, it would look pretty good. My criticism of China is that since 2008 and 2009, the Chinese have had the world's worst debt performance. We haven't done that well here on borrowing money and getting a lot of growth. The Chinese have done much, much worse. They're also an aging country, meaning about now the Chinese are roughly on average as old as the United States. The average age of their citizens, they're going to get older a lot faster because of the one-child policy. Mm-hmm. And China's still going to be big. It's still going to be important. But when I think of an indebted, aging country, I'm not worried about it taking over the world. I am worried, definitely, about China, the party feeling insecure and causing trouble because it's worried about its control at home. So I don't mean to say that China can't be dangerous. They can be, and they are going to be important. There's no question. But I think the trend for China is there's a pretty risky trend here. They got to handle their debt problems. They got to handle an aging population. Those are tough things to get a hold of.
I recall a story, and I recounted it when John and I did our introduction to this interview, about Rupert Murdoch going over to China and kind of laughing with these businessmen, saying, everybody tells me that the Communist Party is in control, but I haven't met a communist yet. And they all looked at him, knowing that, of course, they were all part of the Communist Party. What do we not understand about capitalism versus communism within the confines of China?
I think we have this stereotype of Chinese communists as being like Mao Zedong, or like old style Soviet communists or current North Korean communists, that they're out there screaming about Western capitalist dogs. That's not Chinese communism. Chinese communism is the party has to remain in control of China. What's a big part of that? That means that the government has to be able to control the economy to make sure that the party remains popular and there isn't too much trouble. And the rest of China is, okay, if you understand that the party's controlling, there's no challenge to the party, and you know that we're able to control the economy when we need to, do whatever you want. So all those businessmen there, they know the deal. They know that they can make money and they can be good capitalists as long as they don't challenge party control. And when the party comes to them and says, as it did in the financial crisis, the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, says, we need you to do things, you do it or you get arrested. So, it's this funny mix. It's not the capitalist dog propaganda type that we get from North Korea. It's not capitalism. It's not free markets. It's not voting. Clearly, it's, you get to do what you want until the party needs you to do something, and then you better fall in line.
This is Dr. Derek Scissors from the American Enterprise Institute. We're talking about China, its impact going forward, impact on the United States. And I've got to ask you about this. I got a mailing from the Independent Institute, and they headlined it, An Economic Miracle, China's Great Migration. And this is a professor who has written this book of comparative politics and political economy of China from the University of Hawaii. By skillfully employing primary data and secondary sources in this book, China's Great Migration, they shed a bright light on China's great liberal leap forward. It's a free market story of how China removed the chains from human capital and how that facilitated an explosion of entrepreneurship. Is that representative of what you think is going on in China?
I think somebody's publisher got a little carried away there. Look, there's no question that if you compare 1976 China, or 1977 China, let's do 40 years, to 2017 China. 2017 China is a lot freer than 1977 China. In 1977 China, you couldn't move to another city. You couldn't switch out of your job to another job. You couldn't go to the supermarket and buy what you wanted to buy. All of that was not possible. They were not only, desperately poor, it was also in a really repressed society. So when they're talking about a migration that people can move from the countryside to the cities and find work, you couldn't actually do that 40 years ago at all. It wasn't legal. You would get arrested and sent back to where you came from, and no job for you and possible prison time. So compared to 1977 China, 2017 China is an amazing story, and there was an amazing change where a horribly repressive, nasty, and poor regime said, we got to stop this. We got to become somewhat less repressive. We need to have our people be better off than they were. That's the Deng Xiaoping contribution. So I think that part of it is right. I think what the publisher or the author missed is China really has not become more liberal and more successful in the last 10 or 15 years. You can argue about when the turn occurred. Maybe I would say it would be earlier and some people would say it would be later. But we're not getting more freedom for people. We're not getting better economic growth. That story ended, in 2000 or 2005, something like that. And we really haven't seen progress in the last 10 or 15 years.
Just today, I know that we saw that there was a death in China of a great reformer and somebody who had been jailed by the regime. And how commonplace is that? We also have been focusing on Russia and their lack of civil rights and their lack of rights to journalists. How repressive still is China?
It's very repressive on certain subjects. In other words, if you are complaining, I have an advantage. I talk about economic issues, and I can criticize China on economic terms, and sometimes they don't like it, and they, I get my views.
Do they respond to you?
No, they respond, yes. I will occasionally get written up in the press as being wrong, the Chinese-controlled state media as being wrong about something because I hit a little too close to home. It's one of those weird things where when they ignore you, you're probably wrong, but when they attack you, you've hit on something and you've done a good job. But on the economic side, there's some leeway. If you say something like the Communist Party should no longer rule China, you're going to get arrested, and it doesn't really matter who you are and how eloquent you are and how talented and creative and brilliant you might be. If you say something like Tibet should be independent, it's really not a part of China, you're going to get arrested. So there are sensitive places where China is almost as bad as it used to be 40 years ago. There are others where, go on and live your life. Basically, if you don't criticize the Communist Party or its core policies, you're okay. But if you cross that line, you're still going to get thrown in jail, and things can happen to you where you never come back out.
President Trump thought that he had come to some understanding with President Xi related to North Korea. How wrong was he, and how much does he misread the Chinese psyche as it relates to the importance of keeping North Korea separate from South Korea?
I think he was wrong, and I think the president and the administration are realizing that. I think they thought the North Korea problem was easier to solve than it is. I wouldn't say the Chinese like North Korea at this point. I think they consider North Korea kind of an embarrassment, but they're not willing to do anything about it. They're not willing to take the very strong action that would be necessary to change the direction North Korea is going in, because it would be great if North Korea were a more reasonable country. That would be fine. But they don't want the gain to turn out to be a unified U.S.-friendly Korea on China's border. They want North Korea to be different than it is now, but still either independent, or they want a unified Korea that's more friendly to China than the United States. So the Chinese have different goals than we do, and to get North Korea to change is really hard, and I don't think the administration realized how hard it was. And so they were way too optimistic about China helping us and being effective with that help.
Our positioning in the world today, where in fact we're not as close with some of our Western European allies as we had been in the past, America first, how does that have any impact on China's thinking about the debate between the United States and China over trade policy?
Well, I think that, they don't know what to make of this shift. The president won on a very protectionist platform, which is very surprising from a Republican. He hasn't really done that much yet about it, so it's not, is what's the campaign the real President Trump, or is the administration so far the real President Trump? It's fine for, China can say, oh, look, there are opportunities with us among countries that are concerned about the new administration in the United States. We can talk to them. That's all fine. But the question for them is, if the United States says we don't want all these Chinese goods, if we take a very strong and possibly unwise, I'm not endorsing it, I'm just talking about it, trade action, those goods have to go somewhere. If China stops shipping all those cell phones to the U.S., they're going to want to ship them to Europe, and the Europeans aren't going to want them. So we're still in a situation where whatever you think of American policy, we're the ones who buy all the world's excess production. Whether you think that's okay or it's bad, it's still true. So you can make deals with other countries, but if the U.S. really stops buying Chinese goods, they don't have an alternative to us.
America getting out of the pact that relates to climate change. Some say that China is trying to take a lead now on solar and other forms of renewable energy. And of course, we have thought of them over the years as a great polluter and one who really was ostracized from this climate change debate. Where is their stance? What's real about what they're doing?
Well, I mean, this is one of those things where everybody can find evidence for what they want, because China's big. They're by far the biggest coal users in the world. They use possibly half of the world's coal, and they don't have half of the world's population, so they're using a lot more coal than they should in some sense. On the other hand, they also invest the most in the world's wind and solar. So if you want to paint the green picture of China, you can say they're spending a lot of money on alternative energy, and if you want to paint the polluting picture of China, you can say they're by far the world's biggest user of coal. For me, this comes down to the fact that as China's economic growth has slowed, they have more options. When they were growing really fast, they had to use coal. The same thing may happen to India. If you're growing quickly, you use the cheapest form of energy you have. You don't want your growth to be messed up, lose those jobs because you're spending time building an expensive wind power plant someplace. You're using what's available. When you grow more slowly, like Europe, you have more choices about what to use. So I think China's transitioning from by far the biggest producer of greenhouse gases, which they are, to a country that's willing to try to clean up the air, clean up their water, and spend money to do that, which is what the environmental types see when they look at China.
When you looked at the debate that went on in the United States and a lot of the things that Donald Trump said during the election campaign, you said that he was correct, that there are serious problems, but wrong about what the problems actually are between the U.S. and China as it relates to trade. And, of course, he talked about the manipulation of the currency and the like. So what has he done, and where was he right or where was he wrong?
Well, I'll start with what the president did in the campaign, which, he said that the trade deficit was the biggest problem, and behind the trade deficit was currency manipulation. And, I'm a researcher first and foremost. I go out and I say, well, here's the pattern in China's trade deficit or trade surplus with the U.S., and here's the pattern in their currency policy. And I don't see any connection to American jobs. China devalued the thing we don't like, its currency, in 1994, and the U.S. job market was great. It revalued its currency, which is what the president says he wants or said he wanted during the campaign, in 2005, and the U.S. job market was poor. The same thing with the trade deficit. There's no connection to jobs. Now, that doesn't mean that we should let China off the hook. China steals American intellectual property. It's by far the biggest thief of intellectual property in the world, and I think people think of intellectual property as some advanced technology thing where where it's not connected to the rest of the American economy. That's not true. Intellectual property is basically any idea you have that you're trying to keep other people from copying. So if you have a brilliant idea and you say it on the air, that's supposed to belong to you. People should credit you. And if it's a way to make money, you should go out and get a patent or a copyright or a trademark. And the Chinese just ignore all that. And that's tied to tens of millions of American jobs. So currency manipulation, you can't really tie. If you look at the evidence, you can't connect it to jobs. Theft of intellectual property is connected to jobs. And that's where I think the president's campaign rhetoric was wrong. He really hasn't done much as president about any of these issues. I'm a little concerned we're going to punish countries that are not as bad trade partners as China, and not punish China because they're too big or we need their help on North Korea or whatever may be the case. But so far, the president's talk on the campaign trail has not translated into action. Now, some people would say that's good because they didn't like his talk. Some people would say that's disappointing because they did want him to do more. We really haven't seen any change in U.S.-China policy, just in rhetoric.
Over the past decade, these Chinese construction firms have been active seemingly everywhere but Africa, South America, building power plants in Ecuador and housing in Venezuela, glass cement factories in Ethiopia, just to name a few of those that they have been involved with. Are they overbuilding now in the way that they did internally to add to their footprint? And what causes or what problems could that cause over the next decade for the Chinese economy overall?
I do think they may be overbuilding. I don't, when what you want to do when you're building infrastructure especially is you want to let demand tell you where to build the infrastructure. What are people using? And then if it's too crowded, how do we fix it? You don't want to just build a new airport because, look, I have a shiny new airport that no one will use, or build a new apartment complex where no one will live, and so on. That's what China did at home. I'm concerned that's what they're doing overseas. It doesn't look like they're trying to make money on these projects. And whenever you don't try to make money on infrastructure, you risk the idea that you've just built something that looks really nice and no one wants. They did that at home. I think they're doing it overseas. I don't know that it will cause too much trouble for the domestic economy in China. China is an aging country. They don't need jobs as desperately as they did 10 years ago. What you saw a couple years ago, and still a little bit now, is concern that China is going to run out of foreign currency, that they have the world's biggest pile of foreign exchange, but they also use a lot of it, every day, every week, every month. If they waste a lot of foreign currency on these projects, they're going to have to pull back from One Belt, One Road. It's not a crippling problem for China, but it'll get a lot of attention internationally because people will say, oh, you wasted your own money at home and then you started wasting all this foreign currency overseas. And I think that's 40% chance that's going to happen. They may be not hurting themselves too badly, but making the same mistake they've made at home.
You mentioned all of the Chinese involvement here in the United States, and the Chinese have invited the U.S. to participate in some of their development activities around the world. How beguiling is that opportunity that they're presenting to us, and what are they trying to say to the United States? Are they trying to kind of rub it in that they've got the money today to do a lot of the things that we even internally don't seem to have the will in terms of infrastructure and the like to undertake any longer?
Well, if they're trying to rub it in, I think they're going to be sorry because I don't think they have the money either. You'll see people throwing around things like $5 trillion. They don't have anything like that kind of money. My own view, I'm sure you'll get Xi Jinping and other Chinese officials when they've completed a big project overseas saying only China could do this. No question you're going to get that. My own view is they're going to increasingly be looking for help from the U.S., from Europe, from Japan and Korea, from anywhere they can get it. Because they can't finance all this activity by themselves. Now they're going to want to be in charge. It's going to want to be primarily a China project with other countries joining in. They get to run the show, but they're going to be looking for help. As for whether this is interesting, every American company is going to have to judge the situation itself. I would start off with a view of suspicion because, as I said, a lot of these projects are not intended to make money. They're building giant railways in sub-Saharan Africa. Those aren't going to be money makers. They may help people there. They may help get iron ore and out of Africa to China, but they're not going to make money for the companies involved. So if I were an American firm, I'd say, all right, can I make money on this job? I don't want to be part of this project. I'll do part of this project. You pay me. I'm done. I walk away. Because in the long run, the maintenance on these projects can be very expensive, and I don't think there's money to be made in most of them for quite some time.
Dr. Derek Scissors has been with us today on America Trends podcast. He's a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on the Chinese and Indian economies and U.S. economic relations with Asia. I thank you so much for being with us today here on America Trends. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
If you like this episode, please leave us a kind rating or review. I'm on my hands and knees. Please do it on iTunes, because your review is really critical for us to continue providing this podcast. And John, I know that iTunes looks at this. They want to make certain that we have some rankings, some visibility, and that we're getting some traffic, and then they give you better positioning.
Absolutely. And this way it'll put us in the forefront so you can find us much easier on your iPhone or Android, whatever you may be using.
And they may even send you out an alert. So please, if you can, don't miss a single episode of America Trends podcast. And, John, they can subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher.com.
And also subscribe on our website.
Oh, absolutely.
We send out a little blurb, and we can also take your emails there at newsletter@rifkinradio.com. That's another way to get us.
And we do not sell or share
no
our list.
Spamming, nothing.
Well, I don't know. Does anybody want our list? I don't know, but we don't do it.
Good question.
Even if they asked us. Nobody's asked us. But.
Right.
And when you do subscribe, let us know on Facebook and Twitter. We're getting very active on Facebook and Twitter. Our handle on both platforms, and John, this is really easy, @Trends Podcast. That's it.
That's real easy.
You like that? Did you get that?
I got that.
Okay.
I'm going to have to check it out now. I'm going to have to twit it.
We want to thank you, of course, personally for subscribing. And we also would like to get some of your ideas and questions for future episodes of America Trends podcast. And that's important, too, because we're all over the map. Our interest editorially in the future, John, has no bounds. But we want to know what it is that you'd like to hear from us. If there was a segment that you'd like to see us follow up on, or if there's something in depth that you'd like us to deal with, please let us know that, too.
We're looking at the future. There's so much we can look at.
Yeah, and the topics that we've dealt with, I mean, we have gotten such incredible guests over the recent period, but they're only going to come to us if they know we've got an engaged and interactive audience.
Absolutely.
So it's really important that you become part of this podcast in so many different ways that we're sharing with you today.
You're absolutely right. We need your support and your help and your reviews.
And your ideas.
And ideas.
Or questions on Facebook and Twitter. And by the way, you can direct message us @Trends Podcast or using the hashtag Trends Podcast. You can also add an email address if you have a public one that you'd like us to give out.
Yeah, good. And you know what? We didn't mention Amazon.
Oh, yes. We have an Amazon store.
Yes.
And so if you go up, you don't have to buy the things that might be highlighted at that particular time. You can buy any book, and there's some benefit that comes back
Just
to
put
us.
what you're looking at in the little search engine block there, and it'll take you right to Amazon, and it'll help us out.
Absolutely. And it doesn't really cost you anything more because they have built that into their pricing structure. So we get a little taste and you get more programming like this and you get the item that you were looking for. So it works for all of us.
It's a win-win.
Absolutely. Win-win-win.
Win-win-win.
So for more information on America Trends and for the latest updates on upcoming episodes, be sure to like our page on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. You can find us at Trends Podcast. And again, you can find John and I here in our studio performing as best we can for you.
That's right.
And
Let us out.
What's that? They're not going to let us out. No one is. Hey, listen, thank you so much for joining us today on America Trends. We'll see you next time.
We hope to hear from you soon.
Oh, by the way, we are posting all the time. And we're posting on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Good point.
So just be aware, if you're looking for new episodes, they're coming on Tuesdays and Thursdays. When you wake up, before you go out on your jog or your walk and you want to take us with you, we'll be there for you.
Very good.
All right. Have a great day.